Hello, everybody out there in cyberspace. This is The Shadow, welcoming you back to another episode of Would You View It for a Scooby Snack? As I record this, I'm hoping the technical difficulties and network errors that have prevented me from posting the first episode have been fixed. But that's neither here nor there for now, so let's we pick up where we left off with The Backstage Rage, episode 9, premiering on November 8th, still 1969. As the episode opens, Scooby and Shaggy are walking home, starving to death because they've only had 2 pizzas that evening already and will have to wait until they get home to eat the third. Suddenly a car comes by and, after hitting a bump in the road, accidentally flings out a violin case right in front of our heroes. Shaggy opens it up as the car drives away and finds thousands, if not millions of dollars locked inside. Shaggy leaves Scooby in charge of the violin case while he goes to phone the rest of the gang through a payphone. While he's away, the car drives back, and out pops a poodle, limping and whining. Scooby notices and leaves the case behind to go see to her. Actually, wasn't it a poodle in Decoy for a Dog Napper that Scooby was trying to pick up too? Huh. Scooby must have a thing for French dogs. Anyway, the poodle floats back into the car, and the car drives off. Scooby goes back to where he left the case, and finds that it's missing. When Shaggy and the gang return, Scooby has to explain through pantomime what happened, which kind of confuses me. The show is a little bit inconsistent with how much Scooby can talk and how much the gang can understand him. But again, that's neither here nor there. With nothing else to go on, the gang investigates the area looking for clues, and soon finds a marionette controller with the words Pietro's Puppets written upon it. With the speed of Adam West solving a riddle, they come to the conclusion that it must be a counterfeiting ring. The gang goes to the Strand, which I think must be a reference to the Sherlock Holmes magazine, where the puppet theater is located. They manage to get past the doorman by claiming that they're there to audition Scooby-Doo for the show. Obviously, it doesn't work because, well, he's not a puppet, but Shaggy is able to find a clue, a counterfeit $20 bill, and rushes the gang out of there once he shows it to Fred. Back at the Mystery Machine, Shaggy shows the girls the $20 bill. Both he and Fred are convinced that it's counterfeit, but Velma praises it and concludes that it's real. So, the gang decides to go back to Pietro's to investigate, sneaking past the sleeping doorman to look around. The gang splits up, and hijinks, they be ensuing. The villain of this episode is the Phantom, who looks vaguely familiar. Nah, can't place it. Anyway, he terrorizes them, trying to drop sandbags and chasing them around the theater. But they follow him and find a room filled with violin cases, just like the one that Scooby and Shaggy found earlier. They're then lured back to the stage by the Phantom playing organ music. But when he disappears, Daphne insists he must have been their imagination. Yeah. Remind me one of these days to tell you about the time my friends and I saw a ghost, and one of them said the same thing. Anyway, they're soon attacked by flying Vikings and a pirate, and the dog from earlier shows up, which Scooby attacks, and inside, because obviously it's a puppet, they find the printing plates for $20 bills. The gang goes to wake the sleeping doorman, but it turns out that he too is a life-size puppet, and as they're wondering what to do, a bird swoops down and steals the plates, leaving them no other choice but to go back in to find more clues. The gang goes back underneath the stage and finds the secret room where the printing press is being kept, but are chased off by the Phantom before they can grab any proof. Back on stage, they're menaced again by the Viking and the pirate, only this time Velma realizes they must be puppets. Up on the catwalk, Scooby notices the Phantom and chases him there, and with the help of Fred, he's captured, revealing the criminal to be none other than Mr. Pietro himself. Overall, this is a pretty serviceable episode, but not up to the series' highest standards. Even putting aside the life-size puppets that are realistic enough somehow to fool the gang, there's just too much that challenges disbelief. So, if you're going to watch it, make sure you get your Scooby snacks worth. Our next episode is Bedlam in the Big Top, premiering on November 15th. And if you're familiar with the show at all, you probably remember the ghost clown from this one and his hypnotic gold coin. And gadzooks is this episode creepy. I'm not even kidding, so let's dive in. After the customary opening, where we see the ghost clown lurking in the bushes, we cut to a scene of the Mystery Machine driving through the woods, where they encounter 2 carnies fleeing as fast as they can on bikes. The gang stops to help them, and they introduce themselves as Max the Midget and Samson the Strongman. They explain that they're leaving the circus because of all the weird things that are happening there. And when the gang visits Mr. Barnstrom, the ringleader of the circus, he says the same thing, telling them that the ghost clown is haunting the place and warns them to leave. And you know things are going to get bad when the gang decides to do just that instead of investigating immediately. But Scooby is left behind, having already encountered the ghost clown and being hypnotized into doing the high wire act. The gang doesn't realize this, though, until they've already left, and when they see that Scooby is gone, they turn around to find their friend. They split up, and Shaggy and Velma find Scooby in the big top performing the high wire act, at least until the clown gets bored and wakes him up. Suddenly, Scooby, who has been able to perform the act flawlessly, is now left clinging to the rope and has to jump down onto a trampoline to save himself. There is a scene after this where Scooby and Shaggy and Velma alternate between bouncing off and on the trampoline that I would normally say goes on for a little bit too long. But given how tense this episode has been, again, not joking here, it's a relief, a nice relief from everything. Elsewhere in the circus, Fred and Daphne are looking through the costumes when Fred is shoved into a trunk and locked in, and this time it's Daphne's turn to be hypnotized. Soon Shaggy, Scooby, and Velma find her in the big top, wearing a ballerina costume and riding a unicycle. They follow her into the elephant tent, riding up and down the elephants, only coming to when they spray her with water. Like Scooby before her, she has no memory of what happened to her between investigating and waking up. The rest of the gang goes to free Fred, and they set up a trap for the ghost clown, sending Scooby and Shaggy out with the promise of a hero sandwich if they can lure him into a cage. But this time it doesn't work. Shaggy gets his turn to be hypnotized, believing that he is a lion tamer. Scooby has been separated from him and only finds Shaggy when he yells at a lion that he's fighting with a whip and chair. Thankfully, Scooby manages to save Shaggy before he becomes a snack himself and lure the ghost clown into the cage. But the ghost clown vanishes from the cage, leaving the gang at a loss and frustrated as to what to do next. But something that Fred says jogs Shaggy's memory, who remembers how he was hypnotized, and he convinces Scooby to go back out. Using mirrors, they trick the ghost clown into hypnotizing himself into acting like a chimpanzee and lead him back to the cage. The ringleader reveals that the ghost clown is really Harry the hypnotist, who had been caught stealing and fired, and was now back for revenge. I really can't stress enough just how creepy this episode is. I'm not doing it any justice at all. In fact, I think it's creepier now as an adult than it was for me as a kid, because I now have a real sense of what somebody would do with that kind of power in real life, and because I've been hypnotized once before since then. There's just this sheer evil glee that the clown gets at torturing our heroes. And while they've been in danger before in the past, it's never been for very long. For this, it's this entire episode. Would I view this for a Scooby snack? Yes, I would. I was hanging off the edge of my seat the entire time. And if you do see it, make sure you get your hero sandwich afterwards. You've more than earned it. Our next episode is episode 11, A Gaggle of Galloping Ghosts, premiering on November 22nd of that year. The episode opens with a werewolf looking out at the gang as they drive towards it. At the Mystery Machine, we find out that they're going to Franken Castle, the only castle to be moved to America from Transylvania stone by stone. And if they think that's impressive, they should see the one from Scotland that went to New York. Just before they get to the castle, they see an old card just like the one you see at the beginning of A Wizard of Oz, advertising a fortune teller. Daphne convinces them to visit before going on to the castle. Inside, they meet a fortune teller who looks like she was modeled off of Corporal Klinger, who warns them not to go to the castle, saying that the caretaker had recently been scared off by everything going on there. But, of course, the gang will not be dissuaded. They go to the castle and are greeted by Dracula on the drawbridge, who warns them to leave before it's too late. But Velma isn't having any of it, telling him to knock it off because they have permission to be there. Dracula, seeing that he's failed, turns into a bat and tries to scare them off that way. When even that fails to scare them off, the drawbridge begins to raise by itself. The rest of the gang is able to get off in time, but Daphne is slow and gets trapped inside the castle and chased by Frankenstein's monster. Using a surprising display of courage and rope that must have come from wherever Velma keeps Shaggy's medicine, Shaggy and Scooby swing across the moat, nearly getting eaten by an alligator, and try and save her. They lower the drawbridge for the rest of the gang and get chased by the Wolfman from earlier. Wow. Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman. This is like a British horror movie from the 60s. All they need is a mummy. And when is Vincent Price going to show up? Shaggy and Scooby elude the Wolfman temporarily, by using Shaggy's super ventriloquism skills from the first episode, and then trapping him underneath a chandelier before running off. Meanwhile, Fred and Velma investigate the kitchen and find Dracula, who tries his bat-changing trick on them again. Velma loses her glasses and wanders through a secret passageway in the furnace, separating her from Fred. Velma wanders into the torture chamber, what she thinks is the toy room, and I'm just going to let that one slide. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby go to the kitchen, but only finding monster food, they're not able to get a snack before Frankenstein's monster chases them to Velma, where they all find Daphne in a hole in the ground underneath a grate, who hasn't made any noise despite hearing them in there. They save her and capture Dracula before going off to find Fred. But while going through a dark passageway, Scooby and Shaggy are separated from Daphne and Velma, who find Fred at the end of the passageway behind a door. Daphne shows Fred a clue she found in the hole she was locked in. It was etched on the side of the wall, and she wrote it down. It says, "I have fooled them all. I may perish, but I'll be as rich as King Tut." Fred decides that they have to investigate the crypt after they find their friends. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby find themselves in a mad scientist lab. Man, this really is a riff off of old horror movies, isn't it? And play around. They unknowingly throw an explosive chemical at the Wolfman, who runs off without attacking them, before being chased off by Frankenstein's monster. They meet up with the rest of the gang, who chide them for playing around, before going down to They visit Franken's tomb, and Shaggy and Fred open it, finding not Ulysses S. Grant, but Dracula, who's mad at them for waking him up. And I get it. Dracula chases the rest of them off while Scooby and Shaggy hide behind a tapestry. And when the gang lures Dracula back, they try and capture him with it, but he takes it with him, diving back into his tomb. When they open it back up, he's disappeared, leaving behind a diamond, a ruby, and a gold earring, which they've seen before. They go back to the fortune teller from earlier and find part of the tapestry from the castle, with gems woven into it. It turns out that the Romani woman is actually the actor Big Bob Oakley, and I swear I didn't remember that when I made the Klinger joke, who was trying to scare everybody off so he could find the Franken fortune. It turns out that not only was he her, but also all of the monsters. This episode was a whole lot of fun, right up there with the first episode, and it's probably my favorite episode of the series so far. Once again, you don't need to bribe me into getting me to watch it. Our next episode is Scooby-Doo and a Mummy 2, premiering on November 29th. And hey, we finally got that mummy they couldn't work into the last episode. Side note, when I watched this, I was surprised because I remember some of the details being from a Johnny Quest episode instead. The episode opens with the gang at the local university's Department of Archaeology, where they're helping the professor and Dr. Najib set up a display of Egyptian artifacts, including the feared pharaoh Anka. Dr. Najib is nervous because he knows of a legend that states that if the mummy is moved, Anka will come back to life and turn people to stone. After Dr. Najib leaves, Shaggy finds an old coin that the professor explains is part of a mystery he hasn't solved yet, before sending them out for sandwiches. While the gang are away, the professor is working in his office when he hears a strange noise outside. He looks out and sees the glass smashed in the museum, and he concludes that the mummy has come to life. When the gang returns, they find the professor back in his office, now turned to stone. They go to investigate, and find that the mummy has indeed left his sarcophagus, and the window has been smashed, although Velma points out that it was smashed from the outside. A nice little detail is that you can see that in the earlier scene. And so they split up to investigate, and, of course, hijinks ensue. Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby get chased by the mummy, who wants the coin, first eluding him by hiding in the museum, and then slowing him down by nailing part of his bandage to the floor. There's a pretty funny scene where they get cornered, and after giving Scooby an entire box of Scooby snacks, he tries to fight the mummy. But when that doesn't work, Scooby dances away, leaving the other two behind. Meanwhile, outside, Daphne and Fred are looking for clues when they find a set of footprints that lead to a car. It seems that Dr. Najib has also been turned to stone. Back inside the museum, Velma examines the bandage and realizes that it's probably not 3,000 years old, so she takes Scooby and Shaggy to the high school lab to confirm her conclusion. This is a side note, but I'm going to assume they took the mystery machine, given that I think it belongs to Shaggy because he has it in the later seasons and movies where there are fewer characters. At the lab, Velma runs some tests while Scooby drinks some unknown chemicals because, what do you want from me? It was the 60s, and briefly turns into a frog. But Anka has followed the gang to the lab, and Velma is forced to create a smoke screen with chemicals to allow them to escape the lab, locking him inside. Daphne and Fred show up, apparently teleporting there, and ask what's going on. They explain that they've trapped the mummy inside, but only then do they realize that Scooby was left behind as well. When they open the door, both are gone. Outside a storage shed, they find a statue of Scooby that Shaggy cries over, until Scooby digs himself out of the shed and cries over it too. With the gang reunited, they go back to the museum to look for more clues. Inside the professor's office, they find a book of pictures of artifacts, one of which seems to have a drawing of the coin on it. But before they can follow up on that, the mummy returns and the chase is on. The gang nearly gets captured by Anka and nearly killed by a demonic circular saw. Yeah, I'm not making that one up, before being separated. Shaggy and Scooby find first a human life-sized mold and quick-drying cement, and then the professor in the same shed that Scooby had been in. They're trapped in by the mummy, but escape using an out-of-control power mower that they also use to capture the mummy in a basketball net. Just go with it. The culprit turns out to be Dr. Najib, who knew the secret of the coin and wanted whatever treasures it held. Back at the museum with the professor, the gang investigates the statue they saw in the book and uses the coin to open up the secret compartment, revealing a diamond skin. This is one of those episodes that's not really too good if you look at it too closely, but it does get better with repeated viewing, so maybe get yourself 2 Scooby Snacks before you watch it. Episode 13, Which Wits is Wits, premiered on December 6, 1969. We find our gang returning home from a fishing trip using a shortcut Fred has seen but never used before. Not sure where they're going, they decide to ask a man they see up ahead on the road for directions, but when they stop, they realize he's a zombie and drive off in panic. They find themselves in a town called Swamp's End that seems to be deserted. They ask a man called Zeke, although he isn't named until later, about what's going on, and while Scooby eats Mexican jumping beans, he tells them that months ago, he and his partner Zeb were out frog hunting and saw Wits summon the zombie. Since then, almost everybody else has left except him and Zeb, who refuses to leave his cabin. A mishap with the beans and Scooby forces Fred, Daphne, and Velma to stay behind and clean up, while Shaggy and Scooby go over to Zeb's place to look for clues. Hijinks ensue when they're chased by the monster, and they find a voodoo doll stuffed with pins of Zeb, although Shaggy originally thinks that Zeb himself shrunk. They return to Zeke's cabin with Zeb, and Velma explains that it's a voodoo doll. Now with a mystery on their hands, the gang investigates, getting a boat from somewhere and rowing down the river. After a while, they find the witch and the zombie on a boat ahead of them and follow them, and even after they disappear, they keep going on until they find the witch's house. Inside, they find voodoo dolls of themselves, except for Scooby, and then the witch arrives and makes Daphne disappear in a puff of smoke. Soon, however, they find out that she disappeared through a trap door, as could have been expected, and follow footprints to try and find her. The tracks lead them to an old abandoned riverboat next to which is the witch's smaller boat with a steel-tipped pole to move through the water. They enter the riverboat and split up to look for clues and Daphne. Hijinks ensue. Fred and Velma find a secret room containing Daphne tied up, along with a winch and power tools. The witch appears and chases them down a coal chute, and soon they regroup with Scooby and Shaggy. The gang finds a motorboat and tries to escape, with the witch blocking their way. But when she catches on to Shaggy, they realize that it's just a balloon and not the real witch after all. Fred tries to stop the boat, but finds that the throttle is broken, so Scooby throws the anchor into the water, jerking them to a halt and pulling up an armored truck in the process. Using the winch, they drag the truck to the shore and discover bags of money piled inside. With everything falling into place, they set a trap for the witch and the zombie. Using the money bags to lure the monsters into a trap, they discover that they are Zeke and Zeb, who had previously stolen and sank the truck, and then scared everybody off while they looked for it. The episode is notable because it's the first time that Shaggy uses the coin flip heads I win, tails you lose. But other than that, it's pretty boring. Would I view it for a Scooby Snack? Well, as the song says, 1 ain't enough, Jack, you better make it 3. Our next episode, episode 14, Go Away Ghost Ship, premiered on December 13th, 1969. The episode opens with a ship captain looking through his binoculars and seeing the ship of the ghost pirate Redbeard approaching. But things must not have gone well for that ship captain, because back at the malt shop, the gang is reading about the 3rd missing freighter that month. Freighter owner, C.L. Magnus, claims that it's the work of the pirate's ghost. With a mystery on their hands, the gang goes to see Magnus to offer their assistance. But when they get to Magnus's apartment, the butler won't let them in because he says Magnus doesn't want to be disturbed, forcing the gang to pretend to be room service to get inside. Once they finally get to meet Mr. Magnus, he explains that 300 years ago, his family brought Redbeard and his crew to justice, and now they're back for. They promise to help anyway, saying that ghosts are their specialty. They set out to sea in a small motorboat, using tricks to make it appear to be a large freighter, and get rammed by the ghost ship for their troubles. Actually, come to think about it, I'm not sure what their plan was. With nowhere else to go, Scooby and Shaggy and Fred and Velma and Daphne in separate groups climb aboard the ghost ship to try to find the others. Fred, Velma, and Daphne find a room filled with dry ice, but are locked in by Redbeard. Meanwhile, Scooby and Shaggy are captured by Redbeard, who threatens to slit their throats or make them walk the plank unless they're useful to them. Desperate to save their lives, Shaggy promises to cook for him, and Redbeard gives them the chance. Scooby and Shaggy make something that Shaggy calls ghost pirate stew, made of chains, cobwebs, cinders, and soap, and give it to Redbeard to eat. But he makes them eat it first, and they gobble it down for fear of their life, and blow bubbles in his face to escape. Years, nearly 50 years before Thanos comes up with a similar idea. They elude Redbeard's henchmen when Shaggy makes a paper pirate's hat and uses both his super ventriloquism powers and his super imitation powers to pretend to be Redbeard and lure them away. Back on deck, Scooby and Shaggy accidentally slide overboard in a wooden tub and talk to Fred, Velma, and Daphne through portholes. They paddle behind as the ship sails to a hidden cove on Skull Island. Man, between Skull Island and Haunted Island, these guys need to find a better place to live. Oh, I suppose if you're a ghost hunter, this is an ideal location, like being a lobster hunter in Maine. In a cave on the cove, Fred, Velma, and Daphne are locked up. Fred MacGyver's a way to get the keys using gum and straw that he pulled from nowhere. Man, I really need to take this matchup to Comic Vine. Fred versus Batman. No prep time. Shaggy and Scooby rejoin the gang, and Fred realizes that Shaggy's pirate hat, which he's still wearing, is a ship's manifest for voyages in the future. The gang explores the cave until they find a set of tire tracks that leads them to a dead end and a chest. Inside the chest, they find a skull and spine that asks for the password. The password being yum 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 and a liverwurst a la mode, which is one of the sandwiches that Shaggy orders in Scooby-Doo and a Mummy 2. Once inside, they find all of the missing cargo, and things begin to fall into place. Fred, Velma, and Daphne capture the two henchmen using plungers attached to arrows, while Scooby and Shaggy accidentally capture Redbeard using an automatic pogo stick. A jackhammer. The culprit turns out to be Magnus, who, in dire need of money, stole his own cargo to sell, using the pirate ship as a cover. Overall, this episode was pretty good, if a little bit heavy on the hijinks section. I'd still view it, but only if I got a Scooby snack. Our next episode, episode 15, featured another memorable villain, the spooky space kook, from the episode of the same title, premiering on December 20th, 1969. This would be the last episode of Scooby-Doo in the 1960s. After this, it would be a 70s show. But, not that 70s show. The episode opens with a spaceship landing in a field, and while I'd have to do some research to be sure, I'm pretty sure that the spaceship is meant to be modeled off of a UFO that was actually reported. Out pops a skeleton in a spacesuit, laughing maniacally and presumably on its way to kill the 11th Doctor. We cut to the gang driving the Mystery Machine home when it runs out of gas. Since the nearest station is miles away, they decide to visit a nearby farm to see if they can get some help. But once they get there, the farmer waves his gun in their faces and tells them to get off his land, thinking that the reporter's after a story because there have been UFOs sighted in the area and something else lurking on his property. While he's explaining all of this to the gang, the space kook creeps by without anybody seeing him, including the audience, leaving behind nothing but a set of strange glowing footprints that soon disappear. Sometime later, now with gas in their tank, the gang goes to the abandoned airfield where the space kook has been sighted to look around. There they find another set of glowing footprints that they follow to a building with a warm generator in it. Outside, the spaceship lands, and, not seeing the ghost around, the gang splits up to look for clues. Hijinks ensue. Scooby and Shaggy are chased by the space kook, while Fred, Velma, and Daphne investigate another building and find fresh grease. Then the space kook shows up and uses a hook to lift Fred to the ceiling. For some reason, Daphne and Velma can't get him down or figure out what lever to use, so they have to go find Scooby and Shaggy to get Fred down. The girls find Scooby and Shaggy, who help Fred down, just in time to be chased off by the space kook again. It chases Scooby and Shaggy around the airfield to different places, including the mess hall where they find fresh food like chicken and ham. We also get to see, I think, the first time where Scooby and Shaggy block a door, only for it to open the other way, leaving them vulnerable to the ghost. When the gang finally regroups, they get chased around by a jeep that runs by itself despite having 4 flat tires. But when it finally stops, they look underneath and find a second set of wheels in perfect condition. Before they have time to ponder on this, the space kook shows up with more of its gang, and they're scared off. Scooby and Shaggy take cover in the radio tower, where they find a working projector and a PA system. They send a message to the gang to join them, but the space kook gets there first, and they're forced to parachute to the ground to escape. Back on the ground, the farmer shows up with the sheriff because he saw the mystery machine parked by the airfield and got worried. The space kook runs into the wind tunnel, which Fred uses to unmask him. It turns out that his real name was Henry Bascom, who, after learning that the military was planning to reopen the airfield, wanted to buy up all of the land so he could sell it for a profit. This episode is notable because the gang doesn't solve the mystery before the police show up, nor do they really capture the criminal so much as get lucky. But other than that, it doesn't have much going for it. Yes, the villain is creepy as a kid, but it doesn't hold up the same way the Ghost Clown does, so I think I'll give this one a pass in the future, unless I get a couple of Scooby snacks out of the deal. Our final episode for this round is A Night of Fright is No Delight, premiering on January 20th, 1970. We open with our gang taking a motorboat to an island where Scooby is going to a will reading. Years ago, he saved the Colonel Beauregard from drowning in a pond, and now has been made part heir to the fortune. This is a premise that I think Scooby-Doo has used a few times in the future from this episode, although I may have just watched this episode so many times that it seems that way. Once on the island, they're greeted by the Colonel's lawyer, Coswood Creeps, who introduces them to the other heirs. Cousin Slicker, Cousin Simple, Sweet Cousin Maldehyde, and Nephew Norval. I can only assume that they got named 15 seconds after the writers were told they couldn't go home until they named them. Creeps plays a recording of the Colonel, who explains that his fortune will be divided equally among those who can spend the night in his haunted mansion. Creeps leaves, saying that he'll come back for whoever remains. And it being 10 o'clock already, the gang decides to set in, thinking it'll be an easy task. With the gang settling down for the night, Scooby decides to take a bath, but the wall opens up behind him, and he is slid with his tub down into a coal chute where he's scared by a strange green ghost. He runs back to the room to tell Shaggy and Fred, who investigate the bathroom, but they find the tub still there, bolted to the ground, and with cobwebs on it, so they think it's just his imagination. At the strike of midnight, the ghost comes for Cousin Simple, who's already gone by the time the gang and the other heirs come to help. They find a message in the mirror that warns them to leave before it's too late, or else they'll be next. Doing what they do best, the gang set up a trap for the ghost in Scooby's room. They put a really bad decoy of Scooby in Scooby's bed, with the hopes that when the ghost comes for him, they can capture him. But Scooby and Shaggy are hiding out in a drain pipe, which is pushed over by the ghost, and when Velma comes to help, all three of them are swung into a cave underneath the mansion. Inside the cave, they find a set of footprints belonging to the Phantom Shadow that lead them to a room filled with Civil War memorabilia, specifically that of the Confederate side. They're chased and cornered in an elevator by a floating uniform that turns out to be a duck. Scooby growls and they go up the elevator. The elevator leads them up to Cousin Slicker's room, who's also missing. In fact, when they regroup with the rest of the gang, it turns out that all of them are missing. It's only Scooby left, the rest presumably victims of the Phantom Shadow. They hear organ music coming up from downstairs and go to investigate. Inside a music book, they find the clue, feed the organ, and watch the floor. Scooby starts playing, and the walls start closing in, and the door locks. Luckily, Velma is able to figure out the clue and stop the walls. The trapdoor leads them down to the catacombs, where they find 5 coffins, 4 filled with the 4 other heirs, and 1 left empty for Scooby. Now 2 Phantom Shadows appear, and hijinks ensue as the gang is separated. And it can be a little bit difficult to tell in this episode, because at times it seems like there might be even 4 ghosts, but there really are only 2. Once again, Shaggy and Scooby are the primary targets of the ghost, although in this case, because Scooby's the heir, that makes sense. Eventually they get rid of them, albeit temporarily, by dressing up in 1800s clothes and dancing with them, pushing them down a trapdoor. When the gang gets back together, Velma notices green paint on Shaggy's hand, and Fred gets an idea for a trap. And although it doesn't work like normal, they still manage to capture the 2 ghosts inside a washing machine. The Phantom Shadows turn out to be Cosworth Creeps and his partner Mr. Crawls, who scared off all the other heirs and tried to scare off Scooby so they could keep the money. With Scooby as the sole heir, he's taken to his fortune, $1 million in Confederate money. Now, the gang claims that this is worthless, but I'm sure someone would buy it. Also, he gets to have a haunted bone which he eats. And this is the first time in the franchise that we see a real ghost, despite what most people think. Like the previous episode, this one has a lot of filler in it, but it still manages to be a lot of fun and feel like a classic Scooby-Doo episode, so I would still view it for. And that's it for this week, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me back here next week for episode 3.